Hey, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you may find us, we are back for Connected Brains podcast. So excited to be here. This is a topic, or one of the topics I enjoy discussing just because there's just so much around it. And really, in the end, I think you always understand the individual in front of you better when you know this neurology and what's going on with it. So we're going to be peppering in primitive reflexes. So you might be saying, Brian, is this a quiz? Do I need to know what a primitive reflex is? No, you don't. That's why we're here. We're going to explain to you what it is and just kind of how it impacts your life. But I want to tell you a quick story before I kind of dive into this. So my grandmother, amazing woman, but anytime I wanted to scare her, I could. Sound, just anything I did would get her to jump, startle. Okay, so I enjoyed it immensely because she was my grandma and I thought it was a lot of fun. But looking back, I now understand my grandmother a lot better because of what I know that means. Okay. So let's jump into that a little bit. I started with my grandmother. We're going to be talking about the moral reflex. Let's jump into first. What is a primitive reflex, Heather? What is it? Why do we care about it?
Primitive reflexes are infant survival mechanisms. They are involuntary, subconscious reactions to the environment because we don't have motor control yet. We can't intentionally convey our wants and needs. And so these survival instincts get us by, but they're supposed to go away before the first year of life. And some of them start going away as early as 2 to 4 months, like the startle reflex is supposed to in typical development. So when we keep acting on these survival instincts, it's called integration. That indicates an immaturity in our central nervous system, and it stalls the growth of many sensory motor skills, cognitive skills, emotional, social skills as well.
That was like a textbook answer there, people. Okay, so that's it. It's a reflex, right? It's a survival reflex, gets us out of there are multiple of these. Okay, so we're just going to be talking about the moral reflex, but in summation, it's a reflex. It's helped designed for survival, getting out of birth canals, all of this stuff. So our first year of life is very reflexive, okay? And they slowly start getting integrated into higher parts of our brain. So let's talk a little bit about the moral reflex. This is one, and you'd be surprised how many people you find this on, right? Okay, this is a more common one that you see, and sound is one of the key indicators of this reflex, right? A response to sound. So when you see a kiddo, like a little 2-week-old, and you make a noise and they flail out their arms and they kind of do this thing, it looks funny. That's a moral reflex. And you will see this in kids. You will see this in adults. You'll see this in my grandmother when she was around. Like she would just, and her arms would literally flail. She was like almost a textbook example of a moral reflex in an adult. Okay, so this is a very important reflex. This is a survival reflex. So this is needed for survival in the womb and survival outside the womb. Okay, so it's very, very important, but it's very sensitive to sound. And so, Heather, let's talk a little bit about this. I know you see moral reflex in your clinics all the time. I mean, it's very common with kids with ADHD, autism, OCD, all these other kind of alphabet soup diagnoses that we see. And so let's jump into this a little bit, Heather. What are some of the signs and symptoms that you see with the moral reflex that commonly see in your clinics?
Well, the moral reflex is the only one that is connected to every single part of the sensory system.
Huge.
Yes. And so, I mean, and not just the 5 that you learn, not just pre-K, we're talking vestibular system, internal sensory system as well. And our emotions are the relay stations between sensory information and how we respond to them. Therefore, you will see a lot of sensory sensitivity. It could be sensitivity to movement, bright light. Some kids have difficulty picking up black print on white paper. Fortunately, no textbooks are black print on white paper. But it sounds, you can imagine how distractible. What was that? Who did that? Did somebody sneeze? Somebody knocked. And it can look like they have it causes distractibility, but it does not mean that it's ADHD.
Right.
You can see hyperactivity, impulsivity. Your emotional brain is in charge, and so you're going to be more reactive. You see low frustration tolerance, anger, sometimes aggression. If your kids kick, push, pull, and when they get in those moments, you're like, well, I didn't train my child. They're going into the fight or flight response. It can lead to lying, blaming other people for your mistakes. So and withdrawal, because fight or flight. So some kids will pull back, and parents may think my child is just shy. There are very distinctive ways to tell the difference between shyness and social anxiety. Or you'll see task avoidance. They might blend into the woodwork. I just want to pull back from everything. So, as well as physical health manifestations.
Yes. So one of the kind of the more common ones I see is sound, right? They tend to retract from sound, loud places, lots of noise, a waiting room with lots of kids running around, they pull in. But just like Heather said, I mean, my kiddos with the moral reflex, assuming they go into fight, flight, or freeze, like just kids is like they're just like gone, almost like a ghost, just kind of disappear. They're retracting literally from the noise and all that stuff that's going on. And also, their autonomics are ramped hard. So they are generally in either fight or flight or freeze, one of the three. And I get kind of a mix of all of them, but I tend to see the flight or the freeze more commonly, but I sometimes see the fight. But yeah, it's very common, but this is being missed a lot, Heather. Why is that? Is it just a misunderstanding? Is it that, is there the confusion in the science? I know the answer to all this stuff, but why don't we search for this more frequently if it's so prevalent?
Primitive reflexes are not on developmental milestone charts, and they should be.
They should be.
It's not when we think, when you crawl, when did you walk, when did you say your first words? Are the primitive reflexes gone? And when kids seem on target with some things, then the assumption is that everything's okay. But it matters how we develop our skills as well. 100%. Because if kids are able to do certain things satisfactorily, but they're compensating to do them, they are churning, and it is going to take out of other buckets. So, and another thing is sometimes they do integrate. I mean, they don't actually go away, but essentially, for sake of ease, they essentially go away. They're not impacting your emotions, behaviors, cognition anymore. And then they can come back from trauma. A great example of this is if someone was attacked, and then they might much more easily, oh, yeah, I didn't see you there. They haven't had that their whole life, and then it came back. Or it can be a brain injury or something like that. It can come back as you age with dementia and other degenerative diseases. The grandma story you started with was pretty funny, because my brother and I would always hide. We had a rubber snake, and we also had a pickle, but it wasn't really a pickle. It was a little fake piece of excrement. And we put under her pillow, and she'd put her hand under there. Kids, I look back on them like that wasn't, some of those things weren't very, we loved her and she thought it was hilarious, and then she would hide it for us. And yeah. So, it was a game, and it was all fun. But yeah, so they can also get missed if they went away and development's been fine. And then when a child hits a roadblock, they're just not trying. Either the demands have gone up, or they may have had something that happened that has caused issues that weren't there previously.
Yes, and infection too. Infection is one of the key things that I will look for. A real serious infection can elicit these to come back, right? So yeah, but generally trauma or infection are kind of the two more common ones that I see. But you brought up a great point, because demand, right? Okay, our kids went through terrible 2s, terrible 3s, okay, and then we had a little bit of trouble, in kindergarten, and then first grade, something changed. I know for sure something changed. The demand. Yeah. So it wasn't that the neurology had integrated appropriately, is that the demand, correct? That it was not high enough, or, there was enough, or there wasn't enough.
To reveal the struggle.
Reveal the struggle, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really big, right? And so how would you say that's fairly prevalent?
Oh, that happens a lot. There are certain very pivotal moments throughout school. Of course, every year is building on the one below it, but right. There are certain years where, it's kind of like, third grade is a great example. Think about this in the early grades, you are learning, here's how you count. Here are your colors and your shapes. This sound goes with this letter. That can be difficult for kids who have certain sorts of learning struggles, but a lot of kids can do that all day long. Now, it's not enough for me to know that 2 + 2 is 4. The test used to, that was the test. Now it's do this equation, and I have to add the stuff in this bracket and then divide it by this thing over here and convert it to a percentage. I have to know what's relevant and irrelevant to solve the problem. Class sizes make a big difference because the more kids in a room, the more visual fray, the more background noise, the more distractions, the more things that can startle them or whatever it is that we're talking about in a moment.
100%, yeah. And so I love it. First and third, those are the two most common grades where they're coming in saying, I didn't have a problem, or there wasn't enough of a problem for me to, or I was told this wasn't enough of a problem. Usually that's most likely what happened. Now it's become a big enough problem where something needs to be addressed.
And then the obvious ones, when they're older, 5th grade, you're getting ready for middle school, leap. Middle school, totally new ball game. High school, different ball game from middle, college. I mean, so there are certain moments. It doesn't mean that we have a lot of kids who will just fly through school, easy peasy, like they don't have to work at it. And all of a sudden it can appear that they're making a choice that they just don't care. And that is just rarely the case.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to bring up too with this is with the moral reflex and the autonomic dysfunction that we see. So all kind of the background neurology that's running, heart rate, blood pressure, immune function. One of the most common other symptoms that I see are hypersensitivity to allergies, right? Seasonal or otherwise, and sickness. They tend to get sick a lot. Are you also seeing this as well?
Yes. And I think this is also another reason it gets missed, because if a child is sick a lot or had a traumatic birth, even C-section delivery, even if it went smoothly, that is a trauma on a little one. There can be moments where they were having just a little bit trouble with oxygen. It got under control quickly, but those moments are crucial. And so being sick and not having the same environmental exposure because you're sick, you're staying in bed, you're not being held as much, you're not getting to explore your environment, those can keep the primitive reflexes from integrating. But then also, when they stick around, they can cause more infections. And so it can just look like a sameness thing. They've just always been sick. The sickness kept it from going away. The fact that it didn't go away keeps them continuing to be sick. But that cause effect does not, it's not evident unless you're really looking for it.
100%. And like you mentioned, this isn't this isn't any kind of attack on pediatricians, but pediatricians are making sure, hey, your lungs are clear, your heart's functioning, like it's beating, and you're kind of generically hitting some milestones. They're not, I know almost for a fact that most pediatricians, especially after the first year, are not looking at primitive reflexes, and that's just their training. So that they're just making sure you're alive and everything is working. The reflexes is not their game, and so this is being missed. And so, you get parents that come in like, well, no one's ever talked to me about this. That's not what they're looking for. That's just not in their realm of their exam. And so that's part of the reason it gets missed so frequently, right? They're just not looking for it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about auditory. Let's talk a little bit about visual. I want to tap into that a little bit, and then let's talk a little bit about movement and the moral reflex. So let's start with that. Visually, how does the moral reflex play with kind of visual input and our sensitivities to visual input?
Well, one of the when kids are sensitive to auditory, it often is more obvious, not always, but there are some signs like, this that you see. Some of the stereotypical, if you put up sensory sensitivity in Google, you're probably going to find a lot of, the first thing that's going to come up is auditory. But kids will also be sensitive to light. That could not be obvious. They might be crying because the light is bothering them, but a lot of times when kids are mad or they're covering, and it can just look like a part of the overall sadness, madness. I'm going to be defiant right now. They're not making that choice. I'm just saying what it looks like. And so it can look like, if I do this, you don't exist right now. And it's really almost impossible to know that the light is what set that off. That's what caused the emotion. And sometimes when your little ones are doing that, they are covering their face. That's not as obvious as this. But then as you get older, it can really lead to, there are so many parts of the sensory system. If they have difficulty taking in the entire visual field, I have blinders on and I'm only here. Somebody comes from the periphery and you just feel like they jumped up out of nowhere. You're living in a horror flick. And if you have trouble distinguishing what you're supposed to be reading from the background, you're looking for things. Let's go get your retainer. You're going to grandma's, you're supposed to wear it, but it is on a messy counter that has like marbly looking top, and there's other things laying around. They may not be able to pull that out from the background. But even the white and black, that can be too stark. The paper's white, the print is black. That can be too much discrimination for them. If your eyes are, and here's another thing, one thing that's really taxing, we've talked about this before, but almost 25% of our brain's function goes to visual perception and processing.
Huge.
So if I have the startle reflex, that has me doing this a lot. And then if I don't have control of my eye movements, my saccadic movement, we have these, if I can't just quickly dart back and forth, my eyes could be jumping all over the place to check all the things out. And now my eyes have just run a marathon and I haven't even started reading the story yet. Yeah, many things like that.
One of the things that I do or test is called Pupillary Blow Up, which means I put a light in the kid's eyes and I look to see what's the natural response. This is a stress, right? We got light in the eyes, it should naturally constrict. Well, kids with MORO, they start doing this really quick, and they're called pupillary blow up, which means their autonomic nervous system, which is regulating the pupil size, is saying, all right, there's a stress on it, I'm trying to hold it, and then I can't. Okay, versus what we should see is just trying to do it. It should be kind of a gradual opening, meaning our nervous system is stressed, but it's handling it in a kind of systematic or organized way. Kids are like, I've seen this, I've seen it blow out and then come back, and it's just doing this. And you do that on a kid, you have to do it at the end of the test, I'll be honest with you, or end of the exam, because you do that, you will light that kid up. If that is a real sense of trigger to them, they will be like, they get burned out. Their autonomic nervous system just went full bore, and they're like, and it's a natural response. Their body's reacting the way it should. Not that it should, but it's acting in an appropriate manner for how their nervous system is functioning
to protect us.
Yes.
Even though in that moment there's nothing truly that's a danger. Right. So, which leads to the point of this is involuntary. Viscerally, I go into this stress response, even when there's not real physical danger present, but it's hard to distinguish that. Kids will be jumpy or feel a threat when there isn't one. But another thing that I'm so glad you brought up pupil size, because related to this is there is really fascinating research about how, let's say your kids, you're having one of those really fun moments and it's getting heated, it's escalated in there. One of the reasons Brian and I talk all the time about the information is not going to penetrate in those moments. So settling time, you need it, they need it. And that might be different lengths of time. But one of the reasons, even if you are trying to stay calm, kids will still know you're feeling uptight or stressed with them, is your pupils will be dilated, and subconsciously, they don't know how they know this, but they know that you're heated.
Yeah.
So even if you're doing all the right, you can't control that. The emotions and the stress get your pupils bigger. They know you have a different look in your eyes. They're unlikely to know it's because your pupils are larger, to be able to come up with that. But you got that look in your eyes that you have when you're mad, and that can really put them into a tailspin, in defensiveness or defiance. So that is a physiological sign you can give off that is out of your control, and it's another reason why
your eyeballs are literally your brain, right? So it's just it's the only part of your brain you can see. So it's literally telling somebody what you think. Yep, yeah, I like that. I mean, in down to the idea of parents, you can really take a look at your kids' eyes, because look, they may do the fluctuation, but I get kids in and their pupils don't. I actually had a kid come in at the end of last week, I think it was. His pupils did not constrict at all.
And it can be one eye does one thing and the other eye does the other thing. And so now the brain isn't connected and communicating properly, and half the body thinks this is how we're supposed to respond, and the other half thinks this, and that is just an internal conflict.
Yeah, so parents, you can look at the eyes. The pupil's always big, or they're always constricted. You'll see that too. You will see an always constricted eye. You'll see the difference. That's a fun one because I see it not commonly, but I do see it regularly enough where I'm like, okay, like the brain is not communicating. One thinks that one part of the brain thinks one thing, the other thing thinks the other thing. No wonder you're an emotional wreck, right? Like your brain's just, I don't know what to do here. But the eyes are really kind of a gateway to the brain, and you can learn a lot. Like Heather was talking about, if the brain is searching and the eyes aren't coordinated, okay, stress, light. You go into a room, the light's always flickering, and your eyes are kind of bouncing back and forth, especially if they're offset, right? Like one's doing one thing, the other one's doing the other thing. Holy cow, I would be angry too. Okay, so
yeah, and sometimes kids, if you could ask them, like you have sort of a bullseye and look at that middle circle, and they think they're looking at it. And if you look at where they're looking, they're actually up here when the target is right here. So if I'm always looking up, I'm having to do extra work to get back to where I'm supposed to be and up, and my eyes are closer to a lot of the overhead light, which also leads to sensitivity. Like that, where their gaze fixation is can be off, and they just don't know it. And that's really, unless it is this to this, it's really hard to pick up on that unless you look for it.
Yeah, the eyes in my exam are such a crucial point of my understanding of the kid. Pupils, tracking, saccades, all that stuff is just telling me a whole lot about, and it's so easy to do. It just takes a few moments really in the end and you can just understand that kid so quickly just from just that brief portion. The eyes tell you so much. Okay. We talked about quite a bit here. We're 22-ish minutes in. Anything else, any other points or something maybe I didn't highlight about the moral reflex that you would like to discuss?
Just real quick, because you said you wanted to mention motion. So the vestibular system, sudden motion, we have kids, we can spin them in a barber chair. You're supposed to be dizzy. You do that 10 times a certain speed. When that happens, your eyes have post-rotary nystagmus, letting us know that they detected movement. If you don't have that, you're going to have sensory-seeking kids hanging upside down off the couches, or they can't recover. It keeps going. And so many times one eye is doing something different from the other. They might be over responsive, and then they're overwhelmed. They're in that state of overwhelm, and then they shut down. So they avoid movement unless it's of their key, but other people's movement can startle them. So it is visual and movement that can be overwhelming. And it's just 68% of students described as underperforming, meaning doesn't mean laziness, meaning that they are so capable in so many ways. What is holding them back? 68% described that way have confirmed equilibrium issues. And that does not count the ones who have not been assessed for it. This is based on research of tens of thousands of students from the earliest grades all the way through high school. It doesn't mean they don't have athletic skill. It doesn't mean they're falling over on their face. It is an internal sense of my body position. If you ask me to stand on one leg, my eyes are going to probably pick a focal point on a wall, so that if I start losing the midline, I don't really feel my position. My eyes let me know to get back to the midline. Can they do it with their eyes closed? Things like that, because then you are only relying on your sense of balance, being upright and balanced. If your kids have motion sickness, that indicates something's wrong. So we have so many kids who say, I sometimes feel sick in the car. Have you ever told your parents? No. That can lead to feeling icky in your stomach, and then it just looks like anxiety, although equilibrium can lead to anxiety. They have to pay more attention to staying upright in their chair. Yep. I'm not supposed to have to think about that. I'm having to tax my body so I don't fall out of my seat. That sounds crazy, but they're having to make adjustments that we just don't even have. They're automated. Right. So the vestibular issues are some of the most invisible often. But yet they are prevalent in kids who are struggling. Yeah.
Yeah, 68%. kind of off my experience, I'd gauge it to be closer to 90, probably in the high 80s,
Oh,
90s.
it's definitely higher than that for the kids and adults we serve.
Yeah.
But they're coming in already knowing something's wrong.
Right.
That 68% is when it, like in school, something's holding them back.
Mm.
If they're coming to us, they already know there is usually it's like there's some, and so yes, ours is going to be higher than that, but that is based on school system information across the country.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. And it's gone. Oh, adults. Adults, you can have this. Look, my grandmother had it. Okay. So, yes, your 5-year-old could have it. And again, a lot of times, sometimes it's trauma with the adult. Sometimes it never got integrated and it was missed throughout childhood. Sometimes it's an infection, but you can have it. And the more common ones that I see with adults, but you will see these with kids as well. So I kind of want to highlight it. Headaches and migraines, a big one. Autoimmune symptoms or diagnoses are kind of the two big ones that I see very prevalent, high consistency and correlation. Doesn't mean you have it if you have those symptoms, but
Yeah.
there's definitely a strong tie there to your immune function. And then, we just talked about all this light information. Light is a very big trigger for migraines and some headaches. And so, you're wondering why, I've tried every medication, I've tried everything, and your kids like, I have 7-year-olds that come in with migraines. 7.
Yeah.
And you look at their eyes and you look at the reflexes and you figure it out. This is what's going on. The nervous system isn't prepped for this demand. It can't handle it. And so,
yeah. And I just want to say, it also decreases focus. And if you think about it, if you have a head cold or sinus infection, you might feel a little discombobulated. And during those days, you have to try harder to pay attention. It's like the thinking doesn't just roll. Yeah, I care what they're saying, and I'm just blanked out. That is, imagine that 24/7. It is very tied to increased anxiety, very tied to auditory processing and difficulty following conversations or directions with background noise, or when there's more than one conversation going on. But because equilibrium is the captain of the ship that sends messages to all the other parts of our sensory motor system. So when that is awry, other things are getting faulty signals. Yeah. So that is almost always a shock when I'm meeting with families. But then when we talk through it, then they're like, oh, and they understand it doesn't look like what you just automatically think of when you hear that. And balance does start it changes as you get taller. Your center of gravity keeps changing, and the brain has to quickly adapt and adjust. And if it's just barely hanging on with kids, they might not be able to make those adjustments as their body size changes.
100%. Yeah, that's pretty common. I just want to highlight this because Heather did it, and I want to put more emphasis on this just because it's a neat insight. Kids that do this a lot. They're in school, they're at the dinner table, they're just talking to you, they're doing this. This may not look like a big deal to you. And in the end, it's not a big deal, right? They're just doing this. But if you're doing it all the time, like on a consistent, regular basis, it's telling you something. Okay, so it's a soft sign of neurology and the struggle that's happening there. If they're having to hold their head up, it's telling you something. So look for those soft signs. A lot of the stuff that Heather and I see are soft neurology signs. So they're not hard. A medical doctor is looking for hard, right? Like with, like think stroke. Like that's really hard symptoms there. Like, okay, arm doesn't move. That's a hard. But when a kid's doing this doesn't mean a whole lot to a lot of people. But this, to me, when I see a kid start doing this, I'm thinking, all right, what am I going to find here? So I just, Heather did it. And I was like, we got to highlight that. So, all right, perfect. Okay. Anything else, Heather?
I think that's good. That's a lot. It's so fun to talk about this, but I think we've given enough.
That was Moral Reflex. There are others that we're going to sprinkle in here. I think this is a great topic. We decided moral because it is a dominant, it rules the roost a lot of times in a lot of kids. It is more prevalent than a lot of people realize, but also since it impacts the autonomic nervous system and aka the heart rate, because we see a lot of kids with moral and they have a really high heart rate, right? With Valentine's, let's just do moral. So that's why we discussed that this week. We tie in holidays and our neurology together. That's how we're about this stuff. But anyways, if there's something like, okay, hey, Brian and Heather, like, could this reflex be involved with this? Shoot us a comment, shoot us a message. We'll be happy to talk about that. Maybe we need to clarify a point that we made. Always happy to do that. But we'll be talking more about more primitive reflexes, how they impact this. But the moral one is a big one. And kids with moral reflexes ultimately, from my clinical experience, don't have any other reflexes integrated, at least well, right? They may have some, some variation of it integrated, but for the most part, any kid with a moral reflex, assuming there's no trauma or infection, has every other reflex that you can basically find. So for the most part.
You just made me think of something. I think it's real important to say that just to Brian's point, this is not just a yes or no. Does my child have these infant survival mechanisms integrated or not? It can be mild. It can be mild or severe or anywhere in between. So this is not a yes/no question. And I think it's important to know that.
Sorry, and I meant to highlight this before. When I talk about my grandma doing this is a very overt, extreme kind of, you see it. You're not hiding it, okay? But I get kids and one of the things I do is I walk behind them and I clap, right? I do an auditory stimulus. And a lot of times they'll just do this. Like I'm kind of dramatically doing it just so you can see it, but they'll fire, their muscles will go fire off. Like they're ready to run or freeze. And so those are the things I'm looking for. You might say, oh, my kid doesn't do this. But if they there's a jerking like motion that you'll kind of see a lot oftentimes. And I've had a couple kids actually start taking a few steps, but it can be overt and it can be very subtle. And if you're not looking for the subtle, soft signs, sometimes you will miss them. So thank you for highlighting that. All right, Heather. Everybody wants more Heather because she has such amazing information and websites to go to and so much information to help parents. How do they find you?
At the Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or Southlake.
All right. Great information on there. She also has another podcast, different topics, but great information. I chime in on those from time to time. I watch those from time to time and always learn something new, which is fun. I always like to learn. Those are Tuesdays at 11?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Do you have one coming up this week?
I do. It is answers for frequently asked questions about reading struggles or reading reluctance. Ooh. There are so many things that school assessments don't look at, so many hidden causes of reading struggles or avoiding reading that aren't even if your kid's a good reader but hates it, there's a reason why.
Very good. Okay, that's a good topic. And there's a lot to that. It's not quite as simple as sometimes that parents are presented with. There can be some quite complex. So make sure you join that Tuesdays, 11 o'clock on those same channels that Heather highlighted. Go follow. Great content there. All right. We will be back next week, this same time, same bat channel sort of deal. But if there's anything you would like to hear, hey, talk more about this, or, I want to know something about this, or my kid's struggling with this. What does this mean? Please ask. We are here to help you all. So, all right, Heather, thank you so much. Thank you for all the help that you provide to the communities in your area. And we will be back next week.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Bye. Bye.